Welcome to the VBAC Homebirth Stories podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Winning, founder of the Motherhood Circle and creator of the Journey into Motherhood program. I'm a mother of 3 and have had 2 unplanned and unneeded C-sections and had a calm and positive vaginal home birth, free birth, with our 3rd baby who is 4.5 kilos or 10 pounds. My own journey has sparked a deep passion to support women to find their strength and support to create the pregnancy, birth and postpartum you desire and deserve. This podcast is for women wanting to learn more about VBACs, especially home births, and professionals who want to learn more about how to support home birthing women. Inside, we're going to hear from women sharing their stories from surgical birth to achieving their vaginal home birth after cesarean, as well as expert interviews so that you have a mix of inspiring stories as well as powerful knowledge. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode on the VBAC Homebirth Stories podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Winning, and today I'm really excited to be talking to you about how interview questions for your midwife. So how to find the best midwife for you and some interview questions that you can actually bring to your interview along with you, or have a think about if you're currently feeling a little bit off about your current support and wondering if they're the right fit for you. So this was in my VBAC home birth guide that I created, but I've stopped kind of sharing that for a little while now. So I thought I would just pull some of the juicy insight out of there and actually share it with you today, because the question keeps coming up in my support group, VBAC Homebirth Stories. What is it? VBAC, I'm all over the place. The VBAC Homebirth support group on Facebook. The question comes up from time to time. And I also think the question doesn't come up enough as well. I think what happens a lot in the birth world and through birth culture is that a lot of women feel that if they've got a midwife to support them, that they're safe, they've got the best support, they are going to be fine. But I think and that goes with the whole continuity of care is the gold standard. And I'm not dissing midwives at all. I think some midwives can be amazing. I personally would have loved to have had a midwife for my home birth. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to source one. So I had to choose free birth. Well, I chose free birth because it was the best choice and safest choice for me and my baby, I believe. And I am so glad and grateful that I chose that as well. You may be in a position where you can get a midwife, which you may be looking at midwives. And I think it's really important that you go in with this strategically and that you find the right midwife for you. Just because somebody is a trained midwife doesn't mean that they are going to support you in the way that you want to in birth. It doesn't mean that they are a magical miracle worker who works the way that you want them to be or has the personality that you want them to have. So I want you to start thinking about this strategically and think about what kind of support you want, who you want at your birth, why you want a midwife, what do you want from them, what do you want to achieve. Sometimes, especially I think for VBAC women, we can kind of, and with the world at the moment, the way that things are going, there's a lack of midwives there to support us. And as if it wasn't hard enough for VBAC women anyways, because a lot of home birthing midwives won't support us, the ones who will support us are often getting snapped up by these other women who are now choosing home birth. I mean, it's awesome that so many women are choosing home birth, but unfortunately the midwives can't meet the demand. So a lot of the good midwives, or the ones who have been around for a very long time, who have already got that word of mouth going, who are getting recommended by by other women all the time, are getting snapped up as soon as they get pregnant. So quite often the women who are local to me are asking, who can I, go with? I'm thinking of having a home birth at 30 weeks, and it's too late by 30 weeks. I mean, there may be a midwife out there for you to help you, but you really need to get onto this as soon as you fall pregnant. And I would recommend that you do your research and due diligence before you fall pregnant. So I'd already researched the midwives in my local area, and I'd already interviewed the ones who came highly recommended. I'd talked to them. I saw who was going to support me. I didn't want to get to my pregnancy and find out that, boo-hoo, unfortunately, nobody was willing to support me in my pregnancy. That would have been a bit of a shock to me. So I knew before I fell pregnant that I was having a free birth, and that's how it was. I still, when I got pregnant, called around a few people just to see, but I found that the nothing had changed. I still couldn't find somebody, so that was fine. That's the path that I had to go through. You may find that you may not be able to source a midwife, and that can be deeply upsetting. For me, there was a loss. I definitely grieved. I had to unfollow a lot of midwives who I had previously loved and was encouraged by, because I was so upset that they rejected me, that they couldn't, even though I knew the reason why they rejected me. They have other things to worry about, like insurances, losing their license, not being able to support other women. They're just some of the things that they, often. I've got a midwife friend who just came into practice and she was supporting a VBAC woman, and the hospital basically put a thing on her straight away. And it was like one of the first private patients, no, I wouldn't say patient, but private clients she'd had. And I think it's really, really wrong, and it's a really bad culture that midwives have to work in as well when they're doing home births. So I don't blame them, of course. And I think it's really important for you to understand the system that those midwives are working through. I also think it's really important for you to understand. Recently, there was a post in one of the home birth groups, and one of the ladies said, if you had one piece of advice to give in regards to home birth, what would it be? And I said something along the lines of, know who your midwife is. You don't want someone who's highly medical, lies coming into your birth and sabotaging it or making it different to what you wanted it to be. And then somebody responded, well, what if they want a medicalized birth? And I was like, well, of course you're getting a medicalized birth when you have a midwife, right? They're medical. They've been trained in a university to go through the system. And while they may be midwives who are hands off in that, they still got to go through the system and jump through the hoops, check their checklists off, have the insurances, all those sort of, they still got to work within the parameters that they can effectively work their business through. They also have other things that are medical. They have drugs on hand. They have gas and air on hand, which is really great if that's the kind of birth that you want and you want to have those things available to you. So it was really interesting to hear from that person who said, what if they want a medicalized birth? Well, you're going to get a medicalized birth when you have a midwife. It just depends how medicalized you're going to get it. Now, when you listen to Rachel Reed, Dr. Rachel Reed, she's like one of my most loved and treasured people in the birth space. I literally don't listen to anyone else. Like, there's so many amazing people in the birth space, but I don't have all the time in the world. So I just listen to who I deem is like the best. She talks the most sense to me, and she speaks in a way that I understand. And she speaks to topics that I feel are important to me and my clients as well. She talks about instinctive and physiological birth. And I remember speaking to her in a podcast episode where I interviewed her. Now, let me just double check what episode that was. If I've got it up, I just want to be a bit more prepared, and then I can send you to that episode. Let me have a quick look. Okay, so episode 12 on the podcast, I chatted with her about instinctive and physiological birth. And what I loved about talking with her about instinctive and physiological birth, or just birth in general, is that she was talking about what a midwife does. I think it was Rachel Reed that I was talking about, but a client of mine just told me that her latest book, The Rite of Passages, I think it's called, she was talking about the differences between a midwife and a midwife. And I think it's really important to understand who you're inviting into your birth space. So be really mindful. Are you inviting in a midwife into your birth space, or are you going to have a midwife who walks with women, who believes and trusts in birth, who believes and trusts in you, who is going to sit on the couch, minding her own beeswax, relaxing, sewing? Like, she talks about some of the best midwives are just sitting there sewing or doing something in the background, because the woman's doing all the work. She's the hero. She's the one doing everything. And the midwife's there to just keep an eye on things, hold your hand if you need it, to support you, to guide you if you ever need that. I'm not going to say that you're going to go into your birth and you're going to be like, yeah, I've got this, I don't need support. I'm not saying that anyone should do that, because I myself, in my free birth, I loved having that womanly support and just to be reassured that everything was okay. At times I was like, is everything going the way it should be going? The reason why I hired someone to come to the birth was that they had that experience and a little bit of knowledge. I'd never birthed before. And that's what I wanted and I needed. And so there's no shame in having a midwife or not having a midwife. It's just what you feel is right for you. So I wanted to touch base over that. It's really important to understand who you're inviting into your birth space. I talked more about this in regards to, I think it was episode, let me have another look. I think I've got to go the other way. in one of my later podcast episodes, my more recent, I talked more about this and how to protect your pregnancy VBAC home birth bubble. So I think that's really important in regards to who you invite into your birth space. But first of all, if you're looking for a midwife, you want to go with somebody who's got some recommendations. So you go into home birth groups, your local home birth group, go to the local meetings where they meet up with each other. Most of the time, there's usually like a group that meets up once a month physically, or you can join the Facebook group and ask out in that group. Be mindful of who's making those recommendations. Are they somebody that works with that midwife? Are they somebody who had a birth with that midwife? You want to be taking recommendations from women who have had a birth with that midwife. And then you want to take it a little bit further and actually find out why she loved that person. So you're not going to be able to openly ask those questions in a public forum with that person feeling safe and secure to say, no, actually, I didn't like her, but I'm recommending her because she's the only one I know. But if you get her into a private message, say, follow the procedure and say, can I message you? I would love to ask more questions about this midwife. And then you can go into message if they say it's okay, and you can message them and ask some questions. You can say, hey, what was she like in pregnancy? Did she, support you well? What's her personality like? If you're a sensitive soul, if you're somebody who likes to be mothered over a little bit, or you like somebody who makes you feel a little bit special, ask her those questions, because some midwives are run off their feet. They're busy. They've been doing it for so long. They lose their magic special touch. So some can be really blunt and aggressive in the way that they communicate. That's totally normal and natural for them. And plenty of people will be like, love that kind of communication style or whatever it is. Other people like myself might be a little bit shocked, a little bit unsure and unsafe having a relationship with somebody like that. Personally, myself, as a highly sensitive, I really like to be pandered over a little bit. I love to feel special. I want someone who turns up on time, who says what they're going to do, somebody who calls me when they say they're going to call me, or at least lets me know. Like, I don't like to feel like I don't matter, or that I'm an afterthought. And a lot of highly sensitive people feel like that. So if you're like me, make sure that you keep that in mind and your forefront. Find out how much experience they've had. It doesn't matter if they've only been a midwife for 5 years, as long as they've done a certain amount of births, which they would have, they've got the skill and the experience. I know I had a client, that I worked with who had a really nasty fallout with her midwife, who had 30 years experience. And she was really nasty in the way that she referred my client on and said, oh, well, I guess you'll just have to go with someone who's only got a few years experience. And, that was really nasty. Keeping in mind also at the same time that midwives are just people. Just because you have a midwife badge doesn't mean that you are a kind, compassionate, caring, loving person. Same with nurses. I've met my fair share of bitches in the hospital system who are just harsh, not very nice. Like, I had this one midwife in the hospital who was like bitching about all the people she worked with, bitching about her daughter, and her daughter was pregnant. She was already bitching about, what she was doing. And I thought, well, this is a lovely midwife right here. You cannot change people's temperaments and personalities just because they've got a midwife badge on and their position is caring for people and walking with women. Doesn't mean that that's what they do. Over time they can become brazen or cold and callous. majority of the midwives who are working in home births, I'm sure, are lovely. All the home birth midwives that I've personally met in person all seem lovely. And it's just through working with clients and through talking to other women, there's always there might be misalignment with personalities and temperaments. And I think that that's really important to bring to light. So with that in mind, I hope that wasn't overwhelming and too much information, but I really wanted to get to the point across that you really do mix with the right person. You also want to kind of find out who the backup person is, because the last thing you want is somebody, and I've been present at a birth where the home birth was going fine. It was a first-time mum. She was healthy, active, fine. And 12 hours in, there was the second midwife came, and you could tell first midwife was really cool and relaxed. Second midwife came and she was all business. The energy changed in the room. It went from this first midwife who had done no intervention to breaking waters to there being a problem with the baby's heart rate to you've got to get on the bed and you've got to push, you've got to get this baby out now. It's like, you don't just go from a calm, relaxed birth like that to trying to break someone's waters. Emergency situation, the ambulance got called. Of course, the baby came out before the ambulance came, which is great. But then because the ambulance got called, they, got taken into hospital. You don't want a situation like that. And I was shocked when I'd experienced that, because we're often told like a VBAC home birth is, or not a VBAC home birth, but a home birth is like not medicalized. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because it was more medicalized than, well, it was as medicalized as the situation I had in my hospital experience. And that was just from a matter of changing over, another midwife coming to the scene kind of thing, a new energy and a new presence and a new direction. And, somebody else may be looking at the paperwork and that sort of thing. So you really want to find out who the backup midwife is and what their philosophies are, and really get a feel for who you're going to be inviting into that space. So I've done a list of questions here that I think is really important for when you're interviewing a potential midwife, and I'll just go through some of them. What sort of reasons would she want to transfer you to hospital? So when I was talking with Dr. Melanie on one of the episodes on the podcast, I asked her this question: when would you transfer for a VBAC? And she made it quite clear. And I think Rachel Reed also made it clear that with a VBAC, there's other things that they're kind of looking for when you transfer. See, by asking this question, you're opening the doors by having that open and honest conversation. You're getting a feel for their body language, how comfortable they are. You're getting a feel for their communication style, and you're getting to know them as a person as well. So asking these questions, while it may be uncomfortable, it's not an egotistical thing or a wrong thing to do. I think it's a really important step to take. So you might be thinking, who am I to question a midwife? I'm just lucky if I get a midwife. Or you may be worried that asking questions may put your chances of having a midwife down, and it possibly could. The midwife might think, holy crap, like this woman's, she's onto it. But if a midwife says that you're not a right fit for that, then it's really good insight into who you're going to be working with, because a comfortable, confident midwife with experience who is going to be a good fit for you should be able to have a conversation, should have the skills to have those communication opened up and be able to put it all on the table and just tell you how it is. They should be able to do that. And unfortunately, not everyone has a skill set, or sometimes their ego gets a little bit hurt. And I think it's really good to kind of do this upfront before you hire somebody. How comfortable, so the next one is how comfortable she feels supporting you. So with your specific certain circumstances, for me, I was worried about having a special scar, having 2 cesareans, and also being a bigger woman. I knew those were some of my biggest downfalls. Especially if you're a bigger person, like extremely big like me, you may find it hard to find somebody to support you. But I don't think the big thing's a huge deal. It just depends how much you actually weigh. But the VBAC thing definitely is something that you should explore to see how comfortable they feel about VBAC. you'll get it straight away. If like, I meet up with, my midwife friend and talk to her, she's rolling her eyes when we're talking about birth, and, it's no big deal. Birth's no big deal. Birth's natural. It happens all the time. She's 100% in supporting women, and she loves supporting VBAC women, and just having a general chit chat and conversation, you can absolutely tell that from meeting them. The difference you want to tell is through somebody who tells you, I support this and I support that, to just to get a client, or someone who's really genuine. So you really need to feel into your intuition and get a feeling, go with the gut feeling. Even if they say all the things that you want them to say, you got to feel into your gut. Do I feel like this is the right thing for me? Is this the right, ask your partner, make sure your partner comes with you so that they can interview with you and you can go away and talk about it afterwards. Just because you do all these things doesn't mean that you're going to be like, find the perfect midwife. There may be things that come up in between that you go, maybe this is not the right fit for me. And then you can change in between. But it just really helps you to identify and find the right person for you. Another question is, how supportive and comfortable is she about VBAC in general? How comfortable is she supporting you for a VBAC home birth? How she is during labour. Is she hands-on or off? This will help you decide if she's the right midwife for you and what you want. I'm not saying what the right thing for you is. Only you know what you might want. Somebody who's fully hands-on, fully medicalized. That might be the only way that you feel comfortable birthing outside of a hospital. That's totally fine. That's up to you. As long as you know the risks and what works the best, and you understand the pros and cons of each thing. I mean, look, you don't need to know anything. You can go into this VBAC home birth with eyes closed. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you're not that kind of person, but I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do. I'm just giving you some insight into making a better choice for yourself, because these are some things that I really would have loved to have had when I was looking for my home birth midwife. And I had lots of long conversations with doulas, and I had lots of long conversations with midwives, and most of them were really happy to spend half an hour chatting with me, and I appreciate that, and I really love that. And the whole birth community is really kind and considerate on average, on a whole, so it really is a positive experience most of the time. What are her policies, and what does she need to do in labour birth? So it's really important to know the policies. So if a midwife, I've had a few clients who maybe at 12 weeks in previous births, or, I've interviewed on the podcast, and they share their story that when it got to like 12 hours in labor or 24 hours in labor, they, felt that they would then transfer to hospital. So obviously it's really good to kind of just ask those questions logistically. Oh, would I be on a timer? At what point would you think it was okay for me would you be recommending me to go to hospital, or are you pretty chill about that? So you can kind of get a gauge. If they say like, oh, after 12 hours, I'd be really, stressing, or after 24 hours, I'd be stressing, it gives you a little bit of insight, but it also gives you more to play around with. It means that, okay, well, maybe I won't call my midwife when I go straight into labor. Maybe I'll call her, when I'm feeling like I really need that support, rather than at the start. So it gives you a bit more time. So there's ways that you can work with the information that you find out from your midwife. What else can I have? Can I have no vaginal examinations? And how often will she be using the Doppler to check baby, if at all? Those are the things you want to kind of ask. What would be something she would look for as a concern for her to call a transfer? How long can you labor with her there? What are her time limits? And how long does it take before she has to call the backup doula midwife? And can you meet the backup midwife as well? You want to find out who's her backup, when we should call the backup, and will you get to meet them before birth? You don't have to meet them in person if you don't want to, but you can do like a Zoom call, or at least have a phone call over the phone. How many VBACs has she supported? And just a general feel for how you feel around her. What sort of emotional support is included during pregnancy, and what support is included for postpartum visits, and what visits do you get through that pregnancy as well? And does she come to you, or do you go to her? And, just finding out logistics. So as I mentioned, just check out other women's stories and see if she's the right one for you. They're just some questions and some things to think about. I think we covered quite a lot in that session, so you might have to go back and write some of those down. If you have any more questions or you wanted to kind of go over this a little bit more, please do just find me on Instagram, Ashley L Winning at, what is it? At Ashley L Winning. I will also put a link in the description box below. I think I'm getting a little bit tongue-tied now, guys. I'll put a description in. I always put my social handle, so just slide into my DMs if you've got any questions, or if you found this helpful. If you want to share a topic with me or your birth story on the podcast, slide into my DMs and just say hello. I, of course, want to hear from you. And also keep an eye out for a workshop that's coming up soon. Every month I run a new workshop, so I would love to have you at that workshop and share even more information with you there. I look forward to bringing you another episode, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the VBAC Homebirth Stories podcast. I hope that this episode has helped you take another step to finding your voice and confidence in your VBAC Homebirth journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a second to rate and review. Each review helps us to help more women to find out more about VBAC Homebirth, just like you. Don't forget to take a screenshot, share it to your Instagram stories and tag me at the Motherhood Circle. I'll see you next time.